Imagine you re-out fishing in the middle of the Caribbean Sea and suddenly find yourself surrounded by US ships, helicopters, speedboats, and soldiers all pointing their weapons at your boat. Well, this is exactly what's already happening off the coast of Venezuela. US military action against a Venezuelan vessel has triggered condemnation and a troop mobilization. And even though recent headlines may have shifted the focus elsewhere, the truth is, the Caribbean remains at maximum tension. Friends, this past Friday, September 12th, a Venezuelan ship was boarded by US forces during an anti-drug operation. 18 soldiers searched the vessel, and according to the Venezuelan government, held it for more than 8 hours. The result? Nothing, no trace of cocaine or illegal cargo. But the real issue isn't what they found or didn't find. It's where it happened. Caracas insists the ship was intercepted inside its exclusive economic zone, while Washington claims it was in international waters. Bottom line, another diplomatic storm, and above all, confirmation that the US is now operating openly in these waters. And be careful, because rising tensions could take a toll not only on the Chavasta regime but also on the opposition inside Venezuela. Meanwhile, as the United States strengthens its presence in the Caribbean, many of you may be looking at oil, gold, or even Bitcoin lately as ways to diversify your investment portfolio. But what if I told you there are many other types of assets you can invest in with strong potential returns? In fact, did you know you can invest in companies that aren't listed on the stock exchange? I'm talking about up-and-coming businesses with enormous potential that are looking for investors to grow. Remember, even giants like Apple or Google were once small projects that grew thanks to investors outside of the stock market. This is what's commonly known as private equity. In the US, this type of investment is very common, but in Europe, it has historically been more limited. Till recently, it was mostly reserved for the wealthy, but that's no longer the case. Now, through TR Republic, you too can access this kind of opportunity. They've launched a new service that democratizes investment in private markets. In fact, over the long term, private equity investments can yield around 12% annually. It's not bad if you want to strengthen your portfolio. And to welcome this new service, for every 100 euros you invest before October 14th, they'll add €1 extra. Interesting, isn't it? So don't miss this chance to diversify your assets. Now let's get back to the dramatic story unfolding on the Caribbean coast. Pay attention. Maduro's regime claims it is facing provocation, imperialist aggression, violations of sovereignty, and acts of war supposedly under the cover of Uncle Sam's anti-drug campaign. To the Bolivarian hardliners, the United States has become a bully, harassing harmless fishermen, and a threat to peace. You're all. While Caracas denounces this alleged harassment, Washington is preparing for something much bigger. Because, friends, as we've been telling you, this isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a broader strategy. A new offensive that started with Venezuela, but could expand to Cuba and Nicaragua. And who's in charge of this new front? Rubio? The Secretary of State is personally leading the operations in the Caribbean, clearly aiming to turn this into his big political achievement. Facing him is a Venezuelan regime that's growing increasingly nervous and, this time we mean really nervous. Just days ago, Diosdado Cabello appeared in the middle of the night surrounded by soldiers, unusually dressed in military uniform with a rifle in one hand and a microphone in the other, saying things like, Venezuela doesn't produce drugs, doesn't produce coca leaves, doesn't produce marijuana, has no labs to turn anything into cocaine or any other drug. The attacks against Venezuela are because we have oil, gold, and gas. Meanwhile, Venezuela's defense minister, Vladimir Padrino, announced a plan called Plan Independencia 200 to defend against a possible U.S. strike. He boasted of reinforcing 284 critical points nationwide, including petrochemical plants, airports, ports, and power lines. But many military experts see this as pure propaganda rather than a realistic defense strategy, especially since it relies heavily on the Bolivarian militia, a force made up of civilians without real military training. The regime claims nearly 8 million militiamen are being mobilized, but the reality is very different. They're fewer in number, poorly trained, lacking logistics, equipment, and in many cases even food. Some barracks reportedly have nothing but mortadella to eat. Retired military officers with actual experience haven't even been called, largely because the regime has spent years sidelining and mistreating them. Despite all this, the government calls it active resistance and permanent offense. In truth, it looks more like desperate improvisation than a solid strategy. But this isn't the most important part of the story. What's most concerning is something else. When a dictatorship feels weak externally, it usually hardens internally. In other words, if Maduro's government fears an intervention, even a remote one, it also fears the internal consequences. Defections, leaks, or opposition figures seizing the moment to press harder. This explains why threats against the opposition have multiplied in recent weeks. Corina Machado's party reports that 2 of her aides were detained, and even she herself has received threats. Diosdado Cabello made it clear, "Don't think they can attack us and you'll come out unharmed. That doesn't exist." In other words, the regime is openly warning that if the US intervenes, it will retaliate directly against the opposition. And it's not hard to believe they would, especially considering Donald Trump recently suggested the possibility of launching strikes against drug cartels inside. Venezuela is something that until now had been only speculation. Now, here's the key question. If Maduro and his allies feel cornered, how exactly does their repressive apparatus work? What tools do they have to crush dissent? The Venezuelan repressive system is a kind of Frankenstein with many heads. It's playing its own role. The Bolivarian National Police PNB and its special units, once known as FAES, linked to extrajudicial killings in poor neighborhoods, and now renamed Diet. Despite the new name, their brutal methods remain the same. Masked raids, summary executions, planted evidence, and staged press conferences. The Bolivarian National Guard, GNB, the riot control wall, shields, tear gas, rubber bullets, armored vehicles. They're the ones we always see blocking highways and cracking down on protesters. SEBIN, Bolivarian Intelligence Service, the political police. Experts in espionage, infiltration, and selective detentions. They make activists disappear, torture detainees, and force false confessions. DGCIM, military counterintelligence, the military version of SEBIN. They spy on soldiers, hunt down suspected traitors, and torture them to maintain control over the armed forces. Colectivos, armed civilian groups on motorcycles, acting as paramilitary shock troops. They intimidate neighborhoods while giving the government plausible deniability. It wasn't us, it was the people. Together, these forces impose fear and violence, backed by judges, prosecutors, and the Supreme Court, which provide the legal cover to legitimize illegal detentions, disqualify opposition leaders, and block any institutional escape. And yet, the whole system is corroded by corruption. Police and soldiers earn pitiful salaries, often less than $20 a month. To survive, many resort to extortion, bribes, theft during raids, and other criminal practices. The regime tolerates it as long as loyalty is maintained. Be loyal and steal what you want. This has created a mafia-like structure tolerated by the government to guarantee obedience. Still, the system is weakening. More and more agents are deserting. Some even crossing the gap to reach the US, that said. If pressure from Washington increases dramatically, analysts believe this network of torturers could collapse quickly, as mafias rarely risk their lives for others. But we can't ignore another critical element: international support. Repressive machinery wouldn't have lasted without foreign collaborators. Cuba provided intelligence, counterintelligence, and political control methods, essentially redesigning Venezuela's repressive system after it came to power. Russia supplied weapons, ammunition, helicopters, anti-aircraft systems, and advanced telecommunications interception equipment. China offered surveillance technology, including facial recognition, ID card control systems, and riot control gear. Iran supplied fuel when Venezuela's refineries collapsed, and trained Venezuelan forces in asymmetric warfare. Belarus shared its police state expertise and trained Venezuelan operatives. Each has played its role in propping up Maduro's regime, giving him just enough strength to survive despite economic collapse. So now the question is, how long can this fear-based, corruption-ridden system last? Will Maduro, under mounting international pressure, strike harder against the opposition? What do you think?